Welcome to Reach, your platform to connect with other executive assistants and acquire game-changing knowledge and perspective. Reach is designed to inspire your workday, guide you through pivotal moments in your career, and transform you into the executive assistant you've always wanted to be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reach. This is your host, Jessica Van. I'm the founder and CEO of Maven Recruiting Group, and I have one of my all-time favorite ladies in the studio with us today, Anita Gaeta. Hi, Anita.
Hey there, Jessica.
Hi. So nice to have you with us. Thank you for being a part of our program.
Of course.
I've known Anita for definitely over a decade, and I have admired you so much from the first moment I met you. Just your graciousness, your classiness, your intelligence, your humility. You have always been one of my absolute favorites. So I am truly, truly, truly honored to have persuaded you to join us today. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So why do I like Anita? Well, first of all, she is, and who is Anita? She's currently the personal assistant to the former CEO of Quotient Technology, which is a promotions and media technology company and is also the parent company of Coupons.com. In her nearly 25-year-long career, Anita has had really two primary support relationships, each lasting over a decade, which I think suggests a lot, not only about your immense value to these executives, but also the depth and the extent of the kinds of partnerships you form and the tremendous opportunities for learning and exchange that you've had in your career. Furthermore, when we look at Anita's career, she has been courtside with some of the most formidable and accomplished titans of tech, including Meg Whitman, who many of our listeners know and recognize as the former CEO of both eBay and Hewlett-Packard. Anita has also worked for Lars Dalgaard, who was the founder and CEO of SuccessFactors, and Stephen Boll, who was the CEO of Coupons.com. So today we'll be hearing from Anita firsthand about some of the lessons she's learned and really the observations she's had by being in the room with such renowned tech leaders and executives. So to start us off, how did you get into this field? And what first sparked your interest in the EA career?
Well, this is a good story because I, out of high school, graduated high school in 1983. And I did go to junior college, but really only to play sports. And I never really followed through with my academics. Well, I worked, believe it or not, delivering car parts in my youth. I worked in a dry cleaning business for 9 years, got my state board and was a licensed dry cleaner. Then
I did not know that about you.
Yes, but and then back in, I believe, 92, I was in San Francisco working, pressing clothes and running the machines. And a friend of mine who was an exchange student, she was from Paris, and she came to see me and she says, "What are you doing? What are you doing with your life?" And that day after work, I'm telling you, I lived in San Francisco, and I went home and I called my parents and I said, "I want to come home. I want to go back to school." And I must have been I'm thinking maybe 32 at the time. Anyways, I put all my stuff on the curb in San Francisco, had a little sale, and there I am. I went home and I enrolled in a junior college, and I was a nursing major. I've always loved the sciences, and so I did really well in college, was an A student, but part-time I started working as an administrative assistant for a friend of mine. She was working as the executive assistant. So I went in there working part-time, and I would do filing, and then I was doing accounts payable. And before you know it, I wound up hate to say it, but I took my friend's job. I wound up being the operations facilities manager for NASA Ames Technology Commercialization Center. And what they did was they housed entrepreneurs who were using NASA's technology. Well, anyways, the director of that program says, "You're a nursing major, you should get into business. Business is where it's at." So I changed my major to business and I continued working part-time for NASA. And what I found was I was actually good at what I did. I never thought because I'm typically shy and reserved. And there I had no choice but to be, assert myself. I was running the facility. And coincidentally, Pierre and Jeff, they are the founders of eBay.
And Piero Midyar, right?
Piero Midyar.
Okay.
And they came into our business incubator and I put them, we had this big open space and I was the person who gave them cubicle walls and desks, and they were in our business incubator. And eventually they graduated from our incubator and they needed an office assistant, someone to run the day-to-day. And since I thought I was comfortable where I was at NASA, I told my younger sister, who was a financial analyst at a hospital, I said, "You should go work for them." And my sister was employee number 4.
Wow.
Then I was still working for NASA. And then as eBay matured, they were going to hire a CEO. And so my sister, who had already been at the company a year or so, says, "Hey, we're hiring a CEO. It's a woman. Her name's Meg Whitman. You should come work for her." And the rest is history.
Wow.
Yeah. My sister says, "She's in her office. Come down." And I would leave work early and I'd stand outside of her office hoping just to get a handshake. And she would be chatting on the phone and giggling. And I said, "Okay, I'll come back another time." Well, finally, I got my interview.
Was Meg Whitman already a big deal at that time?
No, she had been running she was working for Hasbro. And she was really a marketing person, bringing Mr. Potato Head to life, etc.
Sure. Yeah.
But back then, Benchmark Capital was doing a search, and they thought her skill set was perfect for the job. Pierre was running it as CEO, but they needed somebody who had been in the business world, if you will. Not that Pierre didn't, but just someone who was comfortable with managing a humongous budget, etc. And Meg was the one.
Wow.
Yeah. So, when I met Meg and I sat across from her in the room, and this is kind of what I do, why I last so long, I guess. But I sat there and I said, "Hey, Meg, I will take care of you. You don't have to worry about anything. I will take care of you." And let me tell you, I got hired that same evening. Mm-hmm. So, and that was my start of my career as a true EA. 12 and a half years with Meg.
Yeah, right.
And I loved every minute of it.
Yeah. There's so many parts of that story that I love. And I think, there's this, and we've heard this, with other guests, like, it seems like sometimes there's just this moment of stars aligning, serendipity, but also like kind of putting yourself in the position of having that sort of happenstance happen to you, right? Like kind of being in the right place, but also I think always preparing for the unexpected, because you never know who's watching. You never know who's paying attention to you. You never know who's looking, who you might, whose attention you might garner or who you might impress. Mm-hmm. And clearly, you had a rapport with Pierre, your sister, connecting you to Meg. Like what an awesome sequence of events. But I think like the thing that I take from that is just really showing up as though every day is the final rehearsal, and it's like you
Mhm.
just never know. You never know.
Mhm. Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
so serendipitous.
Hmm.
So you've mentioned to me before that, throughout your career, you've always found yourself, quote unquote, in the room, right? With these executives or board members or whoever, seated alongside them for important discussions and executive meetings. Was your presence in the room, was that the result of you advocating for your place there, or was it more kind of a natural extension of how your executives viewed your importance and your relevance in those moments?
Well, I have to say that it's the second. I never advocated to get into a room. When I worked for Meg, she's like, come on, exec staff meeting, let's go. So there I would go, and it was Meg, the CEO, and she had all men for her senior staff. And then Meg and I in the room. And Meg always included me in everything. Uh, you know, sit down. And I learned so much from Meg, but I would just sit there. I didn't have a role to play. I just observed. And I think that was the best, like, one of your questions, the best MBA school I could have ever gone to, because I just sat there and I listened, I watched her, I observed how they interacted with her. And even when I worked I worked for Lars for temporary, but he also had me join his meetings. And for Lars, he wanted me to take notes, which I did. And then when I worked for Stephen, another love Stephen. He was great. He and I had a very good relationship as Meg and I did. And he included me in everything. He would just say, come on, you know. I never said, oh, can I sit in on this? No, it was always just, Anita, come on, or sit in on this. So, yeah, so it was great. Great learning experience. I I couldn't have learned it from a book. Let me just say that.
Oh, definitely not. None of this stuff.
Yeah.
So you mentioned this, that Meg was brought in to lead eBay, but I think it's really important to underscore that when Meg joined, the company was basically a $4 million a year company in terms of annual revenue. She took it to $8 billion annually in revenue. I mean, like that, like just to fathom, like to process that, that's insane. Like I can't even think of that, like that trajectory. So needless to say, you've seen some things. So what stories come to mind and kind of key observations or pivotal moments that you were able to witness firsthand during that catalytic trajectory?
Well, I have many a story, but one that sticks out um, is and just shows Meg's character and how she ran eBay is I don't recall the year offhand, but we had a major outage. It was in the beginning stages of eBay, and our technology, we were building upon it. We're getting millions of users, and one day the site goes down. And for that means people can't list. People that have listed, they've paid their fees. They can't, the site is down. And I recall, getting a phone call. I think it was at 1 or 2 in the morning, and it was Meg. Anita, get over here. All hands on deck. And so there I go, running to a 24-hour Safeway and buying soap and toothpaste and shampoo and toiletries and sleeping bags. And we made well, she had me make a war room, if you will. And we have
Wow.
everybody, we're staying here till this site comes up. And Meg, she was there. She slept there on site. And, eventually the site did go up, but then, her business sense had to think, okay, well, we've got millions of users, lost all this money. What are we going to do? You know? And she basically said, what's the right thing to do here for our customers? And, I think she refunded everybody into the tune of $5 million.
Wow.
And yeah, and but in her book she wrote, she talks about this and she says, Wall Street didn't come down on them. The uh, the sellers and buyers didn't come down because Meg, did the right thing. And in doing the right thing, eBay had a set of values. Every company has their mission statement and their values. And I think that what made Meg and eBay so successful, and especially during this outage, which could have just brought the company down, it could have been just a big failure. But eBay's values, I think, were Meg's values. And just to say a few of them, one was basically people are basically good, and that everyone recognizes and have respect for everyone as a unique individual. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Basic values, but she lived by those at eBay, and so did the other executives. And I think that's why eBay did so well in the long run. But during this major outage, it was down for some time, and no one gave up on eBay. And I just think that it was because of Meg's transparency and her leadership with her team that the company, prevailed in that crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's those are the moments I think that really exemplify those crisis moments, right? That
Oh,
really
yeah.
exemplify how someone processes when things are unexpected, and really like when there's a question of integrity. And I think all of those moments really magnify someone's values, someone's integrity, all of the things.
Oh, yeah. And,
I also, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and Meg wasn't, if you will, tech savvy, tech trained, but she listened, and she wanted to learn, and she was in the fray. She would be right there, even if, they would be explaining things to her about the servers, this and that. She was there. She didn't go home. She showed her leadership by being there, just her presence.
100%. I mean, the fact that she was in the sleeping bags with
Yeah.
the Head and Shoulders or whatever herbal essences, whatever it was that you bought from Safeway.
Oh, it's
I love that. I love that visual. That's so good. So thinking about how these executives navigate their roles and how they lead, what are some of the key lessons that you can share with our audience about their leadership style?
Well, I'll speak to Meg first because I know her so well, and then Stephen. And I think both of them share that they're approachable. They're not just high and mighty, in their office and only dealing with, their staff, if you will, their senior staff, their executive staff. Both of them were very approachable. When I worked for Meg, I would look out the window and see her coming. And so I would already have her coffee, and I'd run down the stairs and open the door, grab her briefcase, give her coffee, and then we'd chat all the way coming up the stairs. But along the way, she'd put her bags down, and then what would she do? I call it walk the halls. We were all in cubicles, but she would walk the cubicles, and I'd be, behind her. But she'd be saying hello, good morning, good morning, good morning, and was approachable. Same with Stephen. People didn't feel afraid to come up and start conversation about anything, business or personal. I think the other thing is also being a good listener. Meg, I loved being in the room with Meg because she used to take notes and hear everybody's opinion. And she wouldn't make a decision right then and there. She'd go back to her office and she'd ponder it, and then she'd make a, informed decision. And sometimes, the things that she heard, maybe she didn't take any of their advice, but at least she considered it, and then she would make her decisions. But it was never a shoot from the hip kind of decision making. It was always listening, and then making those informed decisions. And I think the other thing that made her great, and I think Stephen as well, is that people matter, employees matter. You know, for without them, you're not a company. And I think that they both took really good care of their employees and made them feel, that they were needed, they were special. You know, so and I can say that for myself, for the relationship that I had with both Meg and Stephen, is they became my friends, and they're my friends to this day. And that says a lot, because these folks are busy, and I get that Christmas card every year from Meg. We text on our birthdays, and Stephen, he's so sweet. He'll text me on Mother's Day to tell me Happy Mother's Day. I mean, I have really good relationships with them, So it's nice. It's a good feeling, and
It
I think
is.
and I think that lessons learned from both of them in the business world is just listen to your employees, listen to your customers, and always make informed decisions, and be approachable,
Yeah.
because people matter.
They certainly do. And yet, as I think kind of obvious in some ways that is, it's also often disregarded as a priority among executive staff. And I think that they can often lose sight of how impactful it is to just acknowledge the people that are working their tail off for you.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, like this whole ivory tower thing is, I think, a really kind of, I mean, listen, there's different styles of leadership, but I think that it's a really challenging dynamic when to alienate your people, and just that little bit of acknowledgement can go so far in
Yes.
cultivating that enthusiasm in your employees.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did Meg, you mentioned she didn't make decisions in the moment, that she, would take time to kind of compose her thoughts and then circle back. How did she do that? Did she have kind of a way that she would sort of, say to everybody, okay, great, thanks for your input and I'll get back to you, kind of thing? Or how did she, because sometimes I imagine there was a lot of pressure to address and resolve things in the moment, right? Because everything can feel so urgent and critical. How did you see her actually introduce that moment of pause to allow herself that time?
Well, like in exec staff meetings, she'd be sitting around listening, taking her notes, and then basically in Meg fashion, okay. And she'd stand up and we'll get back to you, or, then she'd go into back then we started in offices. So at this point she was in her office. But then, she would have, quiet conversations, maybe one-on-one with each member, to contemplate, or she would chat with Pierre. Pierre would come in and they would be chatting, or I know she would consult, folks outside the company. She was real good with Benchmark Capital, Bob Cagle, and she were very good friends. But yeah, she would just basically get up and say, okay, and leave the room and take her notes and contemplate them. And then, another staff meeting, this is what's going to be done, type of thing.
Yeah. So when I think about leadership, and I think about in particular the function of the CEO, there's so many things they have to do well, right? I mean, they've got to understand the entire breadth of the business. It's so different, and I hear this from a lot of executive assistants who maybe supported a CFO, or they supported a COO, but then they go to support a CEO, and suddenly the scope of their role in supporting that individual has just amplified so many times over, because when you're the CEO, there's so many things that you need to understand. It's not enough to just understand one facet or one division of the company. You've got to understand the whole enchilada.
Yep.
So I think about, at the same time, like, what are the kind of soft skills that a CEO needs to possess? And the things that come to mind for me would be like things like commanding a room, being able to take charge, being able to negotiate effectively, being able to drive a conversation, achieve consensus when there might be disparate points of view or conflict among your ELT. Obviously, problem solving, making decisions, inspiring people, eliciting respect from people. Like, these are just some of the things that I think it takes to be a top CEO, like those you've supported. So we obviously can't go into all of these things because there's a lot, but are there any observations that kind of stand out when you think about Meg and you think about Stephen, you think about Lars, like, in terms of how these leaders did or accomplished these types of things?
Well, the one word that keeps coming to my mind is listen. You have to listen, and I think if you're going to command a room, that's inherent. I don't think that you can, if you're going to go into a room and be try to be I don't know how to. Let me rephrase this. If you go into a room and you try to command it heavy-handed, it's not going to get you very far. I think that with Meg and with Stephen, you go into a room and you're the sponge. You set the stage of the conversation and let the free flow of information come, so that, again, informed decisions. With Meg, again, she wasn't a technology person. She was a marketer, and she learned all these different aspects of eBay, especially the technology. I just think being a good listener is being a good business person. I don't know how to put it more simply, because if you're not listening to your senior staff, if you're not listening to your employees or your customers, you don't have much, So
well, that's where the insights are. Yeah.
Yeah. I just think any business person, you got to listen. If your product isn't selling and your employees are saying, this is the fault, and you want to stay on your high horse, you're not going to sell many. You're not going to sell much merchandise if you're not listening.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that's actually also a very profound takeaway for our listeners, because if you think about it too, I mean, if ever they're in a position similar to, where you've been, where they have the ability to observe and advise, I would wager that there's definitely situations where executive assistants might see conflicts happening or tensions flaring that are really just the result of people not listening and not being open-minded or not being receptive to one another's point of view. And I think that that's a really important tool that executive assistants can, depending on the kind of relationship they have with their partner, that they can share and say, but were you really hearing so-and-so? And this is what I heard him say. Is that, did you actually process that? Because I think that it's so easy for ego and whatever else to intercept what people are trying to say, and it kind of hijacks the whole conversation.
Yeah, and also too, you can hear, but you can hear it, but if you're not listening, you're not going to get it.
Exactly.
I think of just real quick. I was thinking of this, is that, like, Stephen. It was always funny when he would be doing interviews, for a VP or directors, and they would meet with him. And, I'm the first line of defense, if you will. You bring him in, you have that short little conversation, put him in a room, get your boss to go in there and do the interview. And the first thing after the person is gone is, Stephen, so what did you think? You know? And I would give my opinion of the person and he would hear me and sometimes he wouldn't listen. And then the person would get hired and then he would say, "Oh no, I should have listened," type of thing. People can hear, but you have to listen in order to make those important decisions in business.
That's a great sound bite, Anita. Hearing is different than listening. And I think that also is rooted in humility. And that was one of the things I opened up our conversation with, is that I also think of you as fundamentally a very humble person. And I think that that is one of the qualities that you possess. You are receptive to information and to points of view, you know? Yeah. So we said this a little bit about how this experience with these leaders is like the equivalent of earning an MBA, right? Or an organizational psychology degree. So how have these experiences impacted how you show up in your own life? Have you been able to translate any of these skills or learnings in terms of how you navigate your own world personally and professionally?
Well, I'll tell you, again, I've been an EA, I can't believe it, like 25, 26 years. And as I mentioned in the beginning of my career, I was timid, and I had always been timid as a child. I was timid and, if you will, unsure of myself. But I think that through the years, my confidence is a learned behavior. And I've always said that because, back in the day, my mother used to say, "Anita, get on the phone and call and see if the film's ready." And I couldn't even get on the phone with someone. I was so shy. And throughout my career, not by the time I got to Meg, I was full bore confident. It was the NASA business incubator that forced me to come out of my shell. And with that, and it translated into my own life, because I became super organized. And mind you, I graduated in 95 with my associates in science and then changed my major to business. And I decided to go back to school in, I believe it was, 2003 or something. Anyways, while I was working for Meg and traveling around the world with her, I was finishing my bachelor's degree in business. And all of that experience taught me to be organized in business and personal, confident, proactive, and, think ahead of the curve. And I think that, I do it at home. I have two sons. I'm organized with them. We do the same thing the same way every day. That's how I like to run my home. And also, that's how I do for my CEOs. I do the same thing the same way every day. They get used to it. I'm used to it. I have a routine and nothing gets missed. And the same with home, So,
I know you mentioned that in the case of both Meg and Stephen, they kind of very organically wanted you to be in the room. It was a very natural extension of their leadership style, and they wanted you there. They saw the value. What about, though, for some of our listeners today who maybe find themselves siloed or excluded from the type of discussions that you've described that would really allow them to have more context and more exposure? What advice do you have for them in terms of how they can earn a seat at the table?
Well, my thing is, it's all going to depend on the type of relationship you have with your CEO. Now, Meg and Stephen, again, you have to build trust with them, of course, and that comes with time. You just don't earn it. I don't know. My mind says it's the relationship, because I have been with Meg and I'm in the room And, the meeting's over. I'm still in the room, but then they start talking off to the side. No one's asking me to leave, but I just kind of, silently and professionally excuse myself. Same with Stephen. I mean, there's many a times where I was in his office and we're going over things and the general counsel will come in and they're talking confidential information. And I just kind of, will step back and, Stephen will say, oh, no. Just sit right there. We're just going to be a minute. So then I have then I listen to the whole conversation and, Stephen general counsel may leave and then he may ask me questions about it. I have never offered my opinion when it's not asked. If I'm approached, by Meg or by Stephen, then I offer. I have always maintained total professionalism. With Meg and Stephen and with Lars, but I don't go into a room and I'm not chatty. I'm there to do a job, and if Meg and Stephen, we had fun, we laughed, but they initiated it. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm. I do. Yeah.
Yeah. They let their guards down. They, because with Meg, I traveled the world with her and we had a private plane. So we would be in our, little nightgowns at the back of the plane,
It sounds like one big slumber party over at eBay. Let me tell you.
I had so much fun with Meg. But, the guys would sleep up front and Meg and I would sleep side by side in the back of the plane. But anyways, those are the times where the guards are left down. Okay, now, if you will, you're friends and we're just having, one-on-one talk. But in the business field, I was always professional and never, too chatty. That sounds horrible.
No, I think that's so important to say, Anita, because from my perspective, talking to these CEOs, I got to tell you, like, discretion and chattiness or lack thereof is what they want. I mean, the last thing in the world they want is a, executive assistant who runs their mouth, right?
Okay, and I have seen that, and they don't get very far.
They do
so
not.
That's what I'm saying.
No.
I have through the years, interviewed EAs coming on board, whether at eBay or, Quotient. And I always give them all the same advice, and it's probably a prelude to your next question, but, you don't want to talk too much. You want to be professional, and then also I don't know, I think I'm old school with this, but you have to dress the part as well. You know what I mean? And this may be old school, but you don't want to, if you're an EA and you're in a public forum, you don't want to be wearing, unless it's a casual, you don't want to be wearing holey jeans and a halter top, if you will.
Yep.
Always business professional. In all my career, I loved getting up and wearing suits. I worked with Meg so long that sometimes we'd go to work and then she'd come up and I'd look at her and I go, Meg, and she'd be wearing a blue suit with a yellow shirt, and I look at myself, I'm wearing a blue suit with a yellow shirt. I'm like, oh my. But yeah, just professional. Be professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, some things just to paraphrase, like, I agree. I mean, I think the role of the CEO assistant in particular is to be a vault. You have got to think of yourself as a vault. And if there's even the slightest potential that something could be misconstrued or that somebody could accuse you of oversharing or communicating, you've got to err on the side of, less is more. And like you said too, I think that, when you described the relationships and kind of how familiar you allowed yourself to be with the individuals that you supported, I think what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding you, but I think what I'm hearing you say is it's got to be on their terms. Like you can't be the one to initiate the la-di-da, shoot the breeze, whatever. It's got to be on their terms. And if they want to take it there, great. But you can't go there if that's not available to you.
Correct. 100%.
I think those are important things for our listeners to understand and hear. Yeah. So, and you did kind of, I was going to ask you about, excusing yourself from meetings if you ever felt like it was not appropriate. And I think you did address that. So there were some moments where you felt like the conversation was veering in a direction that maybe shouldn't include you. And you would take your leave at those times, which I think is also important to note is you've really got to kind of display the kind of EQ to know when it's more appropriate to leave.
Yeah. And I mean, you don't make a big to-do out of it. You just quietly and professionally walk away.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do. And then continue as you were, doing your work.
Doing your thing. Yep.
Doing your thing.
Yep. So we talked about this, this incredible career that you've led and just these phenomenal experiences that you've enjoyed and had the opportunity to have. What we haven't talked about though are some of the sacrifices that you've had to make along the way. And I'd be curious to know, what that looked like for you and some of those moments that were hard that really, kind of took their toll on you.
Well, when I worked for Meg back in the day, I did not have children. So the demands, it was very demanding. I was a 24/7 with Meg, but it was okay because I was on my own. I would be woken up in the middle of the night. One time Meg was in China. We had some issues with our site in China, and Meg was in China. And I think it might have been about 3 a.m, my time. My phone rings and I answer it and it's Meg. And she says, "Anita, I need you. I have to come back to the States for a board issue, but you're coming back with me." Well, thank goodness I had my visa already. And I had to get up and leave, get up and go. Of course, mind you, I didn't have, responsibilities of children, but I packed my bags and I flew on a private jet to China. And actually in 2005, I finished my senior thesis in a hotel room in Shanghai.
Oh my God.
Because I lived there. I lived in China for 1 month with Meg.
Wow.
And yeah, it was awesome. I mean, it was awesome experience. With Meg, lots of sacrifices, but it didn't affect anybody but myself. Stephen, I would say not so much. I did have children at the time of working with Stephen, but they were very accommodating. And fortunately, I did have a nanny taking care of the kids, so the kids were able to do their extracurricular activities and have the homework done. So that was great. So a little bit of a sacrifice not being able to, make my son's dinner, but I was always home to, do the evening stuff and put them to bed. When I worked for Lars, that I would say was a sacrifice because my children at the time were babies. And Lars was also 24/7. And, if the car didn't show up and you have a baby crying, hanging on your leg, you got to get the job done. And the baby had to cry. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of the way I worked. Many a time in working, when I worked with Lars at Little Stent, my kids were, I think Michael must have been maybe 11 months old.
Was he
Yeah.
that little? Oh my
Yeah. Yeah,
gosh.
and David was a year. I mean, they're only, they're 14 months apart. But that I felt it. I felt the sacrifice there. I'd be
Yeah.
putting them both, laying with them, putting them both to bed as babies, and I'm getting text messages left and right, while he's at a restaurant and do this and do that. That was rough. That was a rough period. But then I moved on from that, and then everything changed once I got to, at the time, coupons.com, because they were very accommodating for my
Yeah.
children, you know.
Right. Right.
And then with coupons, I mean, I worked from home. I've been home for 5 years now, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that, I mean, that does also, I think, bring up an important point, which is that you have to also find, the job that's appropriate for where you are in life, and not everything that you can do when you're a free agent you can do when you're attached in those ways.
Yes, and
So you also have to set yourself up. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, I'm working as a personal assistant, and he's in Chicago, so I'm still working from home, and um, life is good.
Yeah.
I have a good relationship with him. I've only known him now a little over a year, maybe 2 years now, but the relationship is coming along, which is nice. You know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I have no doubt it will be another phenomenal relationship. The,
yes,
the way
yeah.
that you work, that's your track record, Anita. That's your track
Yeah.
record. Um, Closing thoughts on advice for other EAs who want to have a kind of career like you've had, where they can support a titan. I mean, you mentioned some key things along the way about, obviously, minding your P's and Q's, and being a good listener, and being a vault and not oversharing. But any other, advice that you would share with people that want to have the same kind of career that you've had?
Yeah, I think several things. Number one, and most importantly, is be organized. There's no reason why you should miss a task, because everything needs to be written down. Be organized. You know, when I worked for Meg and Stephen, they both had me, every morning scan their inbox, their mail inbox, scan their sent files, and then basically they really didn't have to tell me what to do, because I already read everything. I knew what next steps that Meg had asked for, because I saw her say, I'll have Anita follow up. Well, she didn't have to tell me because I read it. So be super organized, hyper organized, write everything down, cross it off when you're done. And every single day, make your list of what you want to accomplish that day. And if you don't get to it, circle it on the list and add it to the following day. The other thing is, I said that, take notes. Always take notes. If you're in a meeting with your boss, take notes. When you get back to your desk, if there's something that you wrote down that you don't quite understand what you wrote, don't be afraid to go back in there and get clarification and ask question. The last thing you want to do is, for fear of embarrassment, or they might think that you don't get it, they'll think worse of you if you get it wrong. Get it right. Get it right the
Absolutely.
first time. I am a stickler for that. Get it right the first time. If you're asked to do something, or if you're asked for some information, there is no I don't know. There, get those words out of your vocabulary. I'll find that for you right now, or let me look into that, or just never let them see you sweat. That has
Yeah.
been my motto.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
And then I think lastly is always check your work. Grammar, grammar, grammar. When you're writing, make sure that you dot the I, and the period and the commas are all in the right spots. I think grammar is really important. A lot of people, are used to spell check, but good old fashioned grammar in writing correspondence is key. You know, you're an extension of the executive's office, and you don't want to be having all these typos, as you send out correspondence. So I think what's worked for me over all these years is, be professional, don't talk too much, be super organized, don't be afraid to ask questions, and triple check your work. I think that's good. And again, like you said, you're a vault. You're going to be hearing tons of information, but it doesn't go anywhere. I remember I was in New York. We had a strategy meeting out there, and I had dinner with the president of the company. And we were sitting there, and he says to me, and he had just come on board, and he says, "Oh, Stephen talks very highly of you. He said you're part of the executive staff, and open book. We can talk to you about anything." And I thought that was really nice. I want to be, any job I do, I want to be considered that trustworthy, where I am named under executive staff.
Yeah.
So, and that's where I've been. That's how I'm treated, and that's what I'm used to. And it's a great place to be.
It is. It is. I wanted to circle back on one quick thing that you said about scanning the inbox.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that makes a ton of sense. I mean, that's how you can really glean insights as far as what's pressing for your executive, what they've addressed, what hasn't been addressed, what needs follow-up, all those things. But I also think about, these days, there's so many modalities for communication. Do you find that that's harder to do? Because, an executive may be in their inbox. They may also be in Asana or Notion or Slack or Teams and getting, Slacked and message from a variety of different sources. So have you found it harder to be able to monitor those types of things given just the kind of exponentially more chaotic, structures that we have now? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if I go back, and it's almost the olden days, if you talk about Meg in the 90s, right, the internet bubble. So back then, Meg was on a paper calendar. I got her on a computer, and I networked. And so I was able to, read her inbox and all of that. And then back then was Blackberries. Remember those?
Oh yeah.
and so, but we didn't have so much chat, and Meg wasn't, doing the chatting. But what I did have, and it turned from Blackberry, then we evolved to iPhones, was she had a Blackberry. I had my own Blackberry, but then I had a second Blackberry that was hers. So anywhere I was, I had my laptop, but I could be anywhere, and I would be scanning her inbox, it's her Blackberry, has all her information, but I would be scanning in and calling things out to her that she needed, or I had it also too. She had it on her phone, but love Meg. She was really dependent on me. I made her that way. And she would be, saying, "Can I get so-and-so's phone number?" Well, she has it, but, of course I have it. So, send it over to her right away. When I got with Stephen, same thing. We had barely started on the instant messaging, Slack, etc. I didn't find that I was missing out on too much, because Stephen and I talked on a regular basis, and most of the directives came via email, or just directly from him. If there was any Slack thing, he would always bring things up to me, and then we would chat about it. But if he was doing a meeting with his engineers on there, I would know nothing about what was said unless there was a directive that came out of it,
Okay.
And then he would forward something over to me. But yeah, that would be difficult, if they're making plans and it's on Slack and you hear nothing of it.
Yeah. And I think those are, when I think about some of the challenges that come up for our clients, oftentimes it's how do I streamline communication? What are some kind of communication protocols and standards and just ways of operating? It seems like
Hmm.
that becomes progressively more of an issue and communication breakdowns. So kind of solving the communication riddle seems to be an important one.
Yeah, I think
But
also too, I was going to say, every day with Meg and Lars and but Megan Steven, every day I would meet with them. I'd put myself on the calendar and I would have, if not one, 2 pages of different things to ask about, you know, and and get my answers that way. And okay, and then you end it with, is there anything I need to know? Is there anything going, and then, oh yeah, and then tell me something, or nope, we're good, and then you know we would chit chat, or I would just leave the room and continue on with what I was doing.
wow.
So
So that was daily for
yeah,
you.
every day I meet with them. Yes, you have
That's
to.
fascinating because I hear a lot of assistants say, I can't even get my executive to agree to once a week
Oh
meetings.
no. Oh no. I mean, I told Meg and I told Stephen the same thing, is when I interviewed with them. I said, we do the formalities of what you've done, this and that. But the last question I did with Meg and with Stephen is, okay, so I have a question. Do you want to be managed? And I remember Meg was fine with it. Meg was giddy. And Stephen, I remember, I can still see his face. He got, when I asked him that, he got a boyish grin. It was so
Uh-huh.
cute, but he got a boyish grin and he just looked at me and smiled and kind of nodded his head sheepishly, like, yeah. And that's the way I work. And I don't, and I do it with Matt too right now. Is That's the thing. Do you want to be managed? Because it's my job and any EA's job to manage them. They want to be managed. They don't want to be hunting for things. They don't want to, with Meg and even with Steven, you have to think ahead of what they're thinking. Do before they even ask. And once you build a relationship with them throughout the years, you get that, and you're doing it and they're like smiling ear to ear saying, I was just going to ask you that. And it feels so good. It's satisfaction. I really enjoy being an EA for all these years. It works for me. I love it.
I mean, I think that's evident in the way that you talk about it and the pride and really I can hear the joy in your voice. I can hear the satisfaction that you've experienced, in being able to do this job so well and the value that you've been able to create. Like I can really hear it. And it's interesting because I know you started off, on a nursing track and obviously you're not a nurse, but there's an element of, I think that what comes across to me is just how much you enjoy the care aspect of what you do and how much you really want to take that over, like take over those burdens for them and really just offer them back a better quality of existence. That's really how I see your role.
Yeah. And, I wasn't just an executive assistant, I was also personal assistant at the same time, you know, and, that takes a lot of trust on their end, you know, to allow me in, you know.
It does. So I have a final question for you,
Yeah.
and it's the same question I ask of everybody. And I know you've had some great support relationships in your time, so this might be hard for you. But if there was somebody that you could support throughout the course of history, time, living, deceased, doesn't matter, who would you like to support and why?
Okay, so this is a good question because, after working for Meg for 12 years, 6 months, I was like, what am I going to do? You know? And then I started thinking about, who do I want to support? And I never took the step, but I would say that if I could support, I would like to support Sheryl Sandberg.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I've known of her from way back in the day in the 90s. And I just, one, I think of her like I think of Meg. I've never met her, Cheryl. I've never met her, but you know, she's an empowering person. She empowers women, and I'm sure in general is, you know, has that empowering nature for her leadership style. But I just think that, you know, um, she would be someone like Meg. She would turn into a good friend. I think that, you know, she's a visionary, all the adjectives. She's a visionary, she's charismatic, you know, good communicator. And I also think she's a good leader. She has 5 leadership lessons, and you know, I read through them, and they resonate with Meg, Stephen, myself, and I just wanted to read them if you don't mind.
Oh, please, yeah.
So I read that she has 5 leadership lessons that help you in decision making, and that reminds me of Meg. And hers is self perception plays a key role in success. I think that's right on. You know, if you're confident within yourself, you know, you can convince anybody, correct?
Hmm.
And then learn from other people's challenges, create a culture of open communication. And the last one she has is have courage to address problems that others hide from. So I think with these leadership lessons and just things and some of the videos that I've watched of her, I just think that she's a great leader. You know, I don't know if she'll ever be in a CEO role, but if it was ever to come up, I would certainly like to meet her in person, at least
Yeah.
just to get to know her, you know.
I mean, as a professional matchmaker, recruiting matchmaker, that is, I see the parallel. I think that could be a pretty powerful union. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And you know,
yeah,
and you know, in closing, like you said, and I always say it to myself, I'm a traditional, I call it old school executive assistant. I think back then, I'm not bringing myself down or anything, but I am a full-fledged executive assistant, secretary, if you will. I'm not afraid of anything, you know. Through all these years, I've gained so much confidence in myself and in my abilities. And then personally, you know, I am, I'm not chatty, but I have things to say. I have ideas, um, and yeah, I encourage anybody, you know, administrative assistant, up and coming EA assistant, you know, if you love it, continue, because you know, once you get good at something, you know, there's no turning back, really.
yeah. But find the love, right? Like make sure you love it too,
Oh
and
yeah, definitely.
you
You have to
know,
be
and
happy. You have to be
you've
happy.
gotta love it. Like you'll never be great at something that you don't love. And I think that you've got to find, and you may not love, just to be clear, you may not love every single part of your job all the time, right?
Hmm,
But
hmm.
find kind of the overarching thing that ignites you, that rewards you, and really connect to that, because that's going to be what propels you to the big leagues.
Oh yeah.
Well, Anita, I have so enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, me
I
too.
can't thank you enough for sharing your incredible story. I really feel like somebody should license your story and turn it into a movie because it is so fascinating. Like just
Oh,
all of the things and the people that you met and the movers and shakers and the world that you traveled. And as you were talking about, I was literally picturing you in some random hotel room in Shanghai, like banging out your thesis
oh
and
yeah,
slurping on
yeah.
some noodles, or like it's just like there's such an interesting and eclectic life and career you've been able to have as a result of this profession.
Yes,
So
love
it's
it.
just such a wonderful story. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you know, kudos to Meg Whitman. You know, everything. Once meeting her, my career just blossomed, and I blossomed, and I became really good at something that was in me all along. I just didn't know it yet.
Reach is brought to you by Maven Recruiting Group, who specializes in placing executive assistants and support staff to the Bay Area's most prominent executives and companies. If you've enjoyed being part of our podcast community and are interested in becoming part of our candidate community, we're currently hiring for roles in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles. You can visit us at www.mavenrec.com to see some of the roles we're currently working on and to submit your resume.